Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Australian Grape and Wine podcast. Today, we are in conversation with Jason Amos. My name's Lee McLean. I'm the General Manager of Government Relations and External Affairs at Australian Grape and Wine. And as I mentioned, today we have Jason Amos with us. Jason is the Managing Director of Lallemand Australia, a business that will be well known to many in our industry, and also a business that we're proud at Australian Grape and Wine to have as an affiliate member. And also, really importantly, Jason is also the newly elected chair of the Wine Industry Suppliers Australia Network, which is a terrific achievement and a really good appointment for the organisation. So, Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Lee. It's great to be here, and I've been really enjoying the content over the last couple of weeks, hearing from Canberra and Jim Caddy and also Mark Christic as well. So it's a great concept that you're running here.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear it. So, look, today I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit about a few things that I think are going to be interesting to our listeners. And essentially, what I want to talk about is risk. And in 2020, you know, it has really been a year that's been defined by doing our best as an industry association and as individual businesses to manage risk. We've had, you know, at the very start of the year, a number of regions still in drought. Then we've had fires, smoke, COVID-19, and and all of the restrictions in terms of travel and on-premise sales and the like that went with that. Of course, now we are facing some really significant trade tensions, particularly with China. And in the lead up to vintage, we know that there are so many different industries around the country, and we're one of them, facing some really tough challenges in terms of accessing labour in the right sort of places around the country. So it has really been a difficult year, and we've all been working as hard as we possibly can to manage risk as best we can. While I'd love to say that with any sort of confidence that at the stroke of midnight on the December 31 this year, we'll see a completely new year and everything will be better, we know that there will be more risks to manage. And I want to talk to you a little bit about some of those risks in relation to the La Nina weather event that we're likely to experience in the coming months. But perhaps before I go into that, I just wanted to give you another risk that I sort of see on the future, and I think it'll feed well into our conversation. With this China situation, you know, there's a lot of unknowns with this, but one thing that I'm pretty confident of is that it's not going to go away anytime soon. With the lack of demand coming out of China, we know that that's likely to flow on through the supply chain, so that you'll have less demand in terms of wine, less demand in terms of wine grapes, and that's going to put pressure on over the coming years to make sure that those commercial relationships between grape growers and winemakers are really strong. It's going to be a difficult thing to navigate for a few people around the industry, I suspect. But in terms of risk management, before we get into sort of some of the things that you do in the winery, Jason, I just wanted to talk about what I'm sort of thinking about as the 3 C's that grape growers and winemakers can do to help manage those contractual issues in the coming months and years ahead. Firstly, making sure that we've got really strong contracts in place. Secondly, I'll shamelessly plug the Australian Wine Industry Code of Conduct, which I think provides some really good avenues for mediation and solving things when things do get a little bit difficult, and it also provides some really good general sort of rules of racing for those commercial relationships. And critically, and I think this is where you come in as well, Jason, the communication between grape growers and winemakers or suppliers and other areas in the sector are going to be really important. So I just wanted to throw that little bit in there at the beginning. But now maybe we'll shift on to some of the work that you do, and particularly when we talk about La Nina. We know that La Nina brings a high probability of rain and disease pressure and the like. Would you think that is probably one of the biggest risks that grape growers and winemakers are facing over the next little while, Jason?
Yeah, well, listen, Lee, I think it's one of many risks and uncertainty that's coming into the equation. I think, as you've mentioned, Lee, we've had 3 years of drought, and the La Nina has been declared, and doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be more rain like we had. The last rain event that we had was in 2011. It's got a higher probability of that. But I would also put into the mix here, Lee, is that the total changes in supply chain have been a lot, like you mentioned with COVID and also with China. And there's been some big fundamental shifts between off-premise and on-premise sales, supermarket sales, direct to consumer, and also export. So if we look at the complete supply chain, there's so many new unknowns that we have within that. And I think in terms of managing risk, what we need to do is, as you explained, is really openly communicate throughout the sector and throughout your suppliers there as well, particularly on what changes are happening, and then also what are we trying to achieve and what are we trying to mitigate in the risk.
Yeah, and I think as we've noted in the past, 2011 was a really difficult year for so many growers and so many winemakers around the country. And when I look at the calendar now, it's actually quite a long time ago, and there's been quite a bit of we've had a very different set of circumstances over recent years in terms of drought and dry conditions, in particular across large parts of Australia. So I think one risk that I see is that a lot of people in our sector, while they may not have forgotten that it happened, they'll have to really adjust how they go about managing their vintage this year if those increased rain events actually come to pass and those disease pressures come up. I mean, one of the things that I often hear is that doesn't increase rainfall just mean higher yields, but it's much more specific than that, isn't it? What are some of the specific risks that winemakers might face?
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing coming across our desk at the moment is also there is a skill shortage, labour shortage that we've got coming into the next season. It's very difficult to get international workers and even interstate workers coming across the borders are becoming more and more difficult. And so by virtue of that, we've got other challenges that are coming into the production and the operation. And 2021 is a year, Lee, where we need robust and reliable solutions. It's not a year where I'd be looking to experiment or trial lots of new things. We need to, as a sector, communicate with our suppliers and communicate internally on what works really, really well. And if I can take that from the vineyard perspective, Lee, the grape growers have had 3 years of drought, and now we've got more disease pressure coming in. We need to be listening to what's happening in the vineyard and working with the grape growers on determining when is the right time to harvest. And there's going to be compromises that will be made in terms of disease pressure and or flavour and phenolic maturity, combined with operational efficiencies going through the winery here as well. So there's a number of factors that are at play, and I think with us not talking about risk or not being aware of the risk, risk is something we've got to look at what we can control, and that's what we need to be looking at within our businesses.
Look, I couldn't agree more with that, Jason. I think that's a really good observation that taking a cautious approach to this vintage is likely to be the best one. And if we can just the best way to go. And if I could just sort of touch on that labour issue, I was just thinking about this morning. I mean, out of all of the issues that we've dealt with this year that have been, many of which have been really challenging, this has been one of the most challenging for me to deal with, because of course that access to foreign workers, whether they are working in vineyards or working in wineries or servicing some of the technical equipment that wineries and viticulturalists may use in their day-to-day job. A lot of these people come from overseas, and it is a very, very difficult situation for us as an industry. And of course, it extends right across horticulture and other agricultural industries as well. So it's a very, very difficult one. And we hope that, in the spirit of that sort of cautious approach that you were talking about, any solutions that we can get along the way from from other organisations are very much welcomed.
Yeah.
So in terms of, yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Lee, I was just going to add into that as, one of the things that we see, quite often in terms of, let's say, open and transparent communication is when things are difficult and when things are tough, that's quite often not communicated and it's sort of left behind the scenes. And I think if we look at it, the complete supply sector, grape growers, suppliers, winemakers, and even going out to, end users and distribution channels, when things are going difficult, we need to communicate those difficulties throughout the supply sector. So then, because there's lots of options and solutions, whether it be grape growers or your suppliers, that can actually help mitigate some of these risks in the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reality is that this year, next, and probably the year after that, there are always difficult conversations to be had. But as a rule of thumb, I think you're always better to try to be upfront and transparent about those conversations as much as you possibly can. And it's certainly the best way to try to manage those relationships. And that's where things like the code of conduct can come into play as a means to helping those conversations along. So I think we've talked a little bit about some of the sort of broader risks that winemakers and grape growers are likely to face in 2021 now. From your perspective, and speaking on behalf of the Wine Industry Suppliers Australia organisation, what are some of the things that suppliers can do to help producers this vintage? And when I say that, I bear in mind as well that, of course, grape growers themselves are suppliers as well.
Yes.
Is there anything in particular that you're sort of focused on, or you would be recommending that businesses be taking a closer look at?
Yeah, listen, I think what we need to be looking at is robust and reliable solutions throughout the entire supply chain is what we need. And we need to have really good communication channels that is adaptive to the need. And that becomes both on on both sides of the equation. So what I would say is, like I mentioned before, the suppliers and also the grape growers, they've got a lot of experience in dealing with some of the challenges, technical challenges that we're looking at in terms of preparing for more of a wet year. If we look at it as what we see in terms of winemaking operations, they've come off the back end of 3 years of drought. So when you look at your costs and the operations that you've done over the last 3 years, they're not going to be the same when we look into vintage 21. So depending on the financial constraints or the people's experiences, there's going to be more challenges here. So we need to, we need robust and reliable solutions, and we need open communication.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think it's very, very sound advice. Well, Jason, I don't have too much more to add to this or many more questions. Do you have any questions for me before we maybe have a little chat about what we might be putting in our glasses this Christmas?
Well, no, listen, I think the only thing that I would put here is that 2020 has been a year where we've had to adapt. Look at the waters and the seas in front of us, they don't look very calm for 2021. And I would really just bring it back to the human element, where we have to look after our family, we have to look after our staff and our colleagues, and the relationships that we have around with us. So we have to go back to the basics that we need to be looking at through from here. Lee, and I think that's really the key moving forward. And hopefully, we will have easier seas moving forward. But at the moment, some businesses and some people, it's pretty rough going at the moment.
Yeah, spot on. It certainly is. And I mean, you look at some of those cash flow issues that businesses have had to deal with this year, they've been really, really difficult. But I think, as you say, taking an approach where we're sort of putting our colleagues and putting our family and our friends first, is a pretty good basis from which we can do business as best as we can over the next little while. So, look, as I said, normally I record this on a Friday afternoon, and I sort of ask my guest what might be in their glass for the weekend. But we're actually recording this on a Monday, as you know, Jason. So I reckon with Christmas just a few days away, let's have a chat about what we might be enjoying on Christmas Day. I'll start if you like. I'm very lucky to have a nice bottle of Arras Sparkling in the fridge, and I reckon that's going to be a terrific way to start Christmas Day off. Hopefully with a good bit of crayfish if I can secure some here in Canberra.
Wow.
What are you looking into?
Listen, we've got the family coming around. I think it's going to be a nice sunny day here in Adelaide. We'll probably start off with, I think, an Americano. That's a beverage made by Bryn at Chapel Hill, and it's a vermouth spritz, closely followed by, I would say, possibly a Grosset Riesling, which will go down really well with the pork that we're having for lunch on Friday afternoon.
Well, that sounds fantastic. So, look, everyone who's listening, we really hope that you have a very Merry Christmas, and we hope you enjoy a glass of Australian wine. We're certainly promoting everyone to make that choice if they're at the bottle shop to make sure they make a choice to buy an Australian wine this year to help out our industry as much as they possibly can. When you're enjoying a wine, do it with food, do it with family, do it with friends, and do it in moderation. And it's a great way to enjoy your Christmas Day. So, look, Jason, thank you very much for your time today. I think it's been a terrific conversation. If anyone has any questions for Jason or myself, perhaps the best way to get in touch is to send me an email, lee@agw.org.au, and we can make sure any questions you might have get to Jason. And we hope you have a Merry Christmas, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Ripper Lee, thanks very much. Cheers.